past the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. Opened the earth, walking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts. Screaming white-hot flames and agony, she challenged millions of headhunters, dragging and ripping apart impossible tender moments of time, shipping vessels of history, ancient history, destroying the fabric, the godlike claw of destiny, of a people, with a gun, a knife, a cannon, building the hideous wall of blood called slavery. With burning eyes and black skin, torn skin, whipped skin, degraded skin, smashed skin, dehumanized skin, dehumanized skin. Strong enough to bring a plea, strong enough to be free.
Greetings and welcome back. The Cradle reports over 3,000 extrajudicial executions reported in Syria since Bashar's rise to power. Syrian security forces and allied militias are carrying out near daily killings of civilians, targeting them solely on the basis of their sect. What's happening in Syria? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Well, welcome back as always. Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each show, my guests and I provide insight and analysis into current events and the broader historical context in which most of these events take place. Quick look at a couple of today's headlines. Operation Midway Blitz is underway now in Chicago. If you remember, it was either this past Friday or over the weekend when President Trump announced that he was changing the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War. He also posted, now Chicago will know what it means to go to war. So now you're declaring war on American cities. I think that's unconstitutional. Netanyahu says Gaza City offensive will intensify in threat to Palestinian residents. Israel's defense minister also threatened the city with a hurricane of strikes. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu today threatened the Palestinian civilians in famine-stricken, genocide-ridden Gaza City, telling them to leave and warning that the assault on the city would intensify. Comments that came after his defense minister said Israeli strikes on the city would increase. So help me quickly, folks, understand, because I see a great amount of hypocrisy here. So it's okay for Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, to continue his campaign of genocide against Palestinians, but somehow there's a problem with Russia defending itself in what little Marco Rubio himself called the U.S.-Ukrainian proxy war against Russia. Help me understand. That seems to be a bit hypocritical. Finally, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy repeated false and misleading claims on a wide range of health topics last Thursday, and now the Florida Surgeon General, Dr. Ladapo, has said that the state will work to eliminate all vaccine mandates, and he had the audacity to say, who am I as a government or anyone else? Who am I as a man to tell you what you should put in your body? Who am I to tell you what your child should put in their body? I have no right to do that. Au contraire, you do. You are the Surgeon General, dude. That's your job. That's your job, is to tell the public what they should do relative to health. If you had a degree in public health, then you might actually have some insight into what your job and responsibility is. That's who you are as a Surgeon General. Just do your job. On today's episode, the issue before us is Syria. In the 9 months since former al-Qaeda commander Ahmad al-Sharaa took power in Syria, over 3,000 people have been extrajudicially executed by Syrian security forces and affiliated armed factions backed by the United States. The Syrian Observatory of Human Rights reported 2 days ago. Between December 8th of last year and September 6th, they documented the deaths of 10,672 people across the country in acts of violence and violations by local and foreign parties, including 3,020 people who were extrajudicially executed. To discuss this, my guest has been a labor and human rights lawyer since graduating from Columbia Law School in 1993. He served as in-house counsel for the United Steelworkers for 26 years. He's an award-winning author of many books. He taught international human rights at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law from 2012 to 2023. I still consider him to be Professor Dan Kovalik. Dan, as always, congratulations on the book. It's just been released. Welcome back.
Wilmer, thanks for having me. I always enjoy talking with you. You're one of my favorite people, sincerely. So,
well, you are very kind, and that, Dan, just means you need to get out a little bit more. That's all that means. Thank you, my brother. I really appreciate that. Syria, Anatomy of Regime Change. You co-authored this with Dr. Jeremy Kuzmarov, and look with what I used in the open in terms of the latest numbers coming from the Cradle Report. What say you, Professor Dan Kovalik?
What's happening in Syria is a historical tragedy. First of all, I think the numbers are probably low. You know, you mentioned 3,000 civilians killed since the new government, which is al-Qaeda. Let's just not mince words. It's al-Qaeda took over. It's probably certainly in the tens of thousands of people killed, although a lot of people have been disappeared, so we may never know the extent. In addition, women and girls are being kidnapped and forced into marriage, which was happening, by the way, in the war against Assad. The same people were doing that. They were kidnapping women and girls and taking them to Idlib, which is where the terrorists were residing. Of course, now they've taken over the whole country. In addition to that, historical monuments, churches, mosques, and other antiquities are being destroyed systematically. Syria, amongst many other things, I have to remind people, because most people think of Syria as a Muslim country, and it is a majority Muslim country. But it also is a historical Christian country. In fact, Christianity, the Christian church itself, was founded in Syria, in historic Syria. Many saints and prophets and disciples of Jesus walked the streets of Damascus.
Mm-hmm.
In order to cure that problem, which is seen as a problem by the new government, they're literally taking up the Roman stones in the Christian quarter of Damascus, and they're paving those streets, getting rid of any remnants of Christianity there. It's heartbreaking to me. And by the way, there's a number of different Islamic sects within Syria as well. So it's majority Sunni, but also you have the Shia who are being oppressed. You have the Alawites, which is an Islamic sect, being oppressed. They're the most oppressed peoples now in Syria because they're considered apostates. They practice a very kind of kind and gentle version of Islam. Women don't have to cover themselves in any way. Alcohol is not only allowed, it's actually used in various ceremonies. And as one Alawite told me, he says, when you were in Syria, when you were in the Alawite sections, did you ever see a mosque? I said, oh, no, I guess I didn't. He says, well, we don't build mosques. He says, we have a personal relationship with God. It's a very lovely version of Islam. And those are when you look at the numbers of people killed, the Alawites are the number one group being killed. In fact, during the war, the U.S. the Western-backed war on Syria and the Assad government, the rebels' battle cry was Alawites to the grave, Christians to Beirut. Meaning death to the Alawites and exile to the Christians. And that's what they're carrying out right now that they run the show. I mean, my heart is broken. Syria, I've been there 3 times. I was there twice when Assad was in government, and then I was there recently in January under the new regime. And, again, first and foremost, the Syrians are suffering. But also, the world has lost this historic nation, this beautiful nation, a tapestry of many ethnic groups, of many religions, a place with historic antiquities going back to the Roman Empire and before. And that's all being lost. I mean, I cannot understate the sorrow that I feel for what has been lost and what will perhaps never be found again.
Sandra, I like the way that you framed that, the loss that will never be found again. Sandra Hearn, thank you for that $20 super sticker. Robert Brown, thank you for that $5 super sticker. And going back to the point, people, I'm sure, at some point have heard of the road to Damascus. The Apostle Paul, whose name originally was Saul, was the one on the road to Damascus. That's in Syria. Also, I'm glad that you mentioned that you've been there 3 times. You and Jeremy have written this book. You didn't spend your time in the library in the stacks writing this book. You've been on the ground. I remember interviewing you twice while you were in Syria. Once you were there for the election,
Yes.
and you were there as an election observer, and you were validating the fact that al-Assad actually that the election, by your determination, was free and fair. And you were there. I remember doing an interview with you while you were sitting on the border, and you were making the point at that time that there was all of this discussion about in the Western press about all of these people that were coming into Syria as a result of al-Assad leaving. But you he says, but they're not showing you all the people that are leaving the country as they walk past you. You were stationed at the border.
Yeah, no, there's been a huge exodus from Syria. Again, many Alawites have gone into Lebanon, neighboring Lebanon, many Shia, many Christians, and many still want to get out. I know many Alawites there who just can't get out because if they try, they're going to be killed. I mean, they're in hiding, some in their homes, some in the woods. I know many Christians who want to get out. Again, they fear even trying, and they have nowhere to go. Lebanon's full up of Syria. This is the truth of it. They've taken in a lot of Syrian refugees over the years, and it's very hard for Lebanon to take on many more migrants. In all these situations, the region suffers, when you have these wars and these terrible conflicts. I'll just go back, and I think I mentioned this in the book. When the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003, that led to about 1 million, I believe, Iraqis migrating into Syria.
Mm-hmm.
And Syria is not that big of a country, to take on 1 million people. And then when the war in Syria started in 2011, hundreds of thousands of Syrians moved into Lebanon. And then when Israel started bombing Lebanon, many people in Lebanon moved into Syria, either moved back or moved there for the first time. You just have people ping-ponging around, right? It's just what the West has done to that region. It's unforgivable. It's absolutely unforgivable. These countries will never recover from this, and you have to add Gaza to that too, obviously. But if you think about all that, Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, I mean, they're very close together, and they're all just being punished and destroyed. So yeah, it's just a monumental tragedy. And the fact is, so the leader, I should just say, so the new leader, self-declared leader of Syria, is a guy. His nom de guerre was al-Jilani. He was at one time the head of ISIS, and then
Okay, Dan, let me read this. Let me read this. This, and I've read this a number of times, but this is from the Wall Street Journal, and I'm going here so people won't think that you're just making this up.
Right.
The Wall Street Journal, December 2nd, 2024, how a Syrian rebel went from an American jail to seizing Aleppo. Once affiliated with Islamic State and al-Qaeda, Jawlani professes religious tolerance. Many have doubts. Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani boarded a bus in Damascus in March of 2003, heading across the desert to Baghdad with fellow volunteers eager to repel the looming American invasion of Iraq. When he returned home in 2011, after a 5-year stint in an American-run prison camp in Iraq, it was the emissary of Islamic State founder Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Jawlani arrived in Syria with bags full of cash and a mission to take the extremist movement global. Last week, 42-year-old Jawlani triumphantly entered Aleppo, Syria's second largest city, as the leading commander of the Turkish-backed rebel force dominated by his group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Unexpected and swift, his victory marks one of the most dramatic moments in a Middle East that has had no shortage of drama. That's the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah. So here's a guy, and he had a $10 million bounty on his head at the time he took office from the United States. The United States had a $10 million bounty on his head. The U.S. quickly took that bounty off his head and quickly recognized him as the president, even though no one elected him as such. And he has no intention of, he's made it clear he has no intention of holding elections for the next 4 to 5 years. But the U.S. and most of the countries of the world quickly recognized him. And by the way, he'll be on the streets of New York City this week. He's going to be speaking at the United Nations General Assembly in New York City. It's just an incredible thing. It really is like if Osama bin Laden, they tried to whitewash him and they brought him to New York and he's going to speak at the UN, and now all of a sudden we're buddies. Of course, you have to remember that just like al-Jilani, Osama bin Laden had been a friend of the U.S. too in Afghanistan, right? He was with the Mujahideen and was considered at the time of fighting the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, was considered a hero by the Western media. Of course, that changed later, but it's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. And he has not changed his ways. What he has done is put a nice face on his regime, at least as far as the outside world's concerned. But no one in Syria at this point is under any illusions about what he's about.
You know, Dan, you know what this is? This is a Horatio al-Jilani story. from rags to riches, from terrorist to leader. Thank you, America. I mean that.
No, in fact, he said, you know, in one of his first interviews as the new leader, he said, look, you know, because he was asked about his activities with al-Qaeda, and he said, look, you know, that was just the, you know, kind of the folly of my youth. You know, some of you drink when you're young, you might have sex in the back of a 57 Chevy. Me, I just like to cut people's heads off, but I don't do that anymore. You know, it's an amazing thing. And the media's gone along with it. I mean, he's, they're now portraying him as all, somehow reformed. All his past crimes, which he's admitted to, again, literally cutting people's heads off, are now forgiven, forgotten. But again, no one in Syria is under any illusions about what's happening. Even many moderate Sunnis are afraid of what's happening. Druze as well, that's another religious sect, they're being oppressed. In fact, I've met, in Pittsburgh, I know a lot of Syrians. There's a large Syrian Christian community, and they knew right away what was coming. They had no illusions that this al-Jilani would be bad. But there were some in Pittsburgh, other Syrians who welcomed him as some liberator, but many of them by now were even like, you know what? I'm sorry. I was wrong. This guy is bad, So most Syrians, they know that whatever they thought about Assad, they know this guy's worse. And he is. I mean, he is what, I mean, a lot of us were saying this during the war, that Assad was protecting the Syrians from these terrorists, and that's what he was doing. And by the way, a lot of the Western media said Assad, that's not true. That's just propaganda. That's Assadist and Putin propaganda that you're fighting terrorists. Oh, well, now the terrorists are in charge. I guess he must have been right. And we were right who said that he was correct, and we were vilified. People who said this is bad, and if these terrorists win, it's going to be bad. We were considered Assadists and all sorts of other things. And we were right, but I don't say that with any relish, because what has transpired, what we predicted would happen, has transpired. And again, it's an unmitigated tragedy. So
we saw that same reality with Gaddafi. I remember very clearly him telling Barack Obama, you don't want to, you need to be very, very careful here about who you align yourself with. You start messing with these folks in the North. I think it was the North. And he said, you're going to open up a can of worms on the world, the likes of which you've never seen. And then I remember John, the senator from Arizona, McCain. He went on this junket to Libya, and he came back, and I remember he was on the tarmac. He had just arrived. He's standing on the tarmac, being interviewed, and they said, well, what should we do? And he said, we need to back the people in the North. And they said, well, who are they? He said, I don't know, but we need to back them. And we are where we are. I remember after Desert Storm, there were a number of Iraqis that said, Saddam was hell, but please bring him back. American interventionist history is replete with creating these power vacuums and not knowing what to do once you've created the vacuum.
Yeah, well, or the truth is, the vacuum is the point. We must now come to the conclusion
that's the objective.
The chaos is the objective, right? Barack Obama, after he left office, he said, my biggest regret is Libya. We broke Libya, and I regret what happened to Libya. But what do you regret? Like, you didn't try to fix it even once it was broken. It reminds me of this line from The Simpsons where these parents are looking at their kid who has problems. They said, we've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas. That's pretty much what he was saying. So I think, look, you have to now look at the pattern. You have to look at Congo. You look at Somalia, you look at Libya, you look at Iraq, you look at Syria, you look at Lebanon, you look at Gaza, you look at Yugoslavia. Chaos is the goal. And when you and by the way, now to double back to what you opened the show with, look at Chicago, look at Washington, look at LA. Chaos is the goal. And the things that the US has done abroad, the destruction of societies, it's now coming home. The same forces that did those things are doing it to our own people and to our own society. That is the goal, because the rulers realized at one point, I talk about this a lot, at one point the US, their strategy around the world was to back strong men who would rule countries for the benefit of the United States. They had Pinochet in Chile, they had Mobutu in Congo, at that time Zaire. They had Suharto in Indonesia. You can go down the line.
Yeah. What's Marcos in the Philippines?
Exactly. But then at some point, and I do think if it's my
Saddam.
Well, he had Saddam, because Saddam.
He was a U.S. guy.
Yeah, Noriega in Panama.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, though, they came to the conclusion, and I think Congo might have been the first place they came to this conclusion to, when they got rid of Mobutu. They came to the conclusion, we don't want strong men anymore. We want nothing. Because even a Mobutu will once in a while have to do something for his people to stay in power, right? He's got to maybe tax a company once in a while, build a road for someone, build a hospital. Well, all that cuts into the profits, right? So they decided it's best if no one rules, if it's just the wild, wild west. And then companies go in there. And again, if you look at Congo, poor Congo, which gets no publicity in the press, right? Millions of people have been killed there, over 6 million, right? The lion's share under Bill Clinton. That's a whole nother story. But once they basically made Congo, an anarchic state, then companies were able to go in, all these mining companies, and just mine the hell out of the place with no environmental standards, no health standards, no laws against child labor. So you have children working in these mines as we speak. There's more children laborers in the world than ever have been in history, right? And that has been allowed by creating anarchy in these countries where, again, you don't even have child labor laws. You have no laws at all. And that's what the future is. That is the future. And that's the future for the U.S. if we don't stand up right now and stop it.
Youssef Muhammad writes, Dr. Leon, what about the Syrian groups that are now showing up in Libya, Sudan, and the Sahel region? Are they being exported there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this is, and again, we have to start, we can go back very far, but let's just go back to 1979 when the U.S. started funding the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. And by the way, 6 months before the Soviet Union invaded, it wasn't to stop the Soviets. It was to draw them into Afghanistan. And we know that because Brzezinski, the national security advisor of Jimmy Carter, said so, that was the goal, and that goal worked. He wanted to give the Soviet Union their Vietnam, right? But we aligned with the Mujahideen, which included Osama bin Laden. So Al-Qaeda grew out of that conflict, right? And they moved around, and we helped them move around to places like Iraq, like Syria. And now you have the HTS group, which is basically the renamed Al-Qaeda in Syria, going into Lebanon, fighting the Lebanese forces, trying to take over parts of Lebanon. And they will go to other countries. By the way, after the West got rid of Gaddafi in Libya, they started transferring weapons from there to the terrorists in places like Syria. So yeah, you will see a migration of these terrorists. Oh, by the way, some, and this is well documented, some of these terrorists in Syria have gone to fight and train people in Ukraine against Russia,
and vice versa.
Yeah, which makes sense, of course, because their old enemy was Russia, right? And you're right, it worked both ways, and some of the Ukrainians have helped with the terrorists in Syria. So all this is going according to plan. It is an evil plan, but it's all going according to plan.
Chapter 1, the first U.S. regime change in Syria, the early Cold War, the 21st century U.S. regime change operations targeting Bashar al-Assad fit with a long history of U.S. covert meddling in Syria dating back to the 1940s. So we can look at Syria in the 40s and look at Iran in 53, and we can see a lot of parallels in terms of when you want to ask yourself, when did all of this start? It's a multivariant equation, but you can go to Syria in the 40s and you can go to Iran with the overthrow of Mossadegh in 53.
Yeah, the West has been meddling in these countries of the global South for many, many years. Again, if we even, well, I mean, if you go back to colonial times, you're talking 500 years. But
right.
In the modern era, in terms of going in and doing regime change type operations, that certainly goes back well over 100 years in places like Nicaragua and Haiti come to mind, the Philippines. And of course, in the Middle East, where Britain first intervened in Iran to seize their oil. And that was in the early part of the 20th century. And again, really, the overthrow of Mossadegh in 1953 destroyed democracy in Iran. We talk about, oh, we're so concerned about Iran, not having democracy. Well, they had a prime minister that was elected that the U.S. overthrew, again, in defense of Britain's oil, which then the U.S. took most of that, right? Because they did the heavy lifting against Mossadegh. But yeah, you had in 1946 the overthrow of the leader in Syria, and
wait a minute. Didn't there's a country Ukraine? Didn't Ukraine have a democratically elected leader, and then the United States had to go into Ukraine and is in Ukraine defending democracy that the United States overthrew?
Yes, in 2014, the U.S.
Okay.
overthrew Yanukovych, who was a president who, and his sin was, they said, oh, because he was too pro-Russian. Really, his sin was that he wasn't anti-Russian enough. He really wasn't pro-Russia, but he was, at the time, he was considering deals that were being offered by both the EU and Russia, and that wasn't good enough.
He was trying to save his economy.
Yeah.
That's all he was trying to do.
That's
he was
right.
trying to save his economy.
And they decided that he was unreliable, again, that he might go with the Russians. And so they decided, no, we're not going to allow that. They went in and overthrew him, put in a hard right government that had Nazi elements, which, again, the West, at least at some point, would at least acknowledge that there were Nazi elements there. Of course, then would pretend that wasn't true once Russia intervened in 2022. All of a sudden, it was just not, Russian propaganda. Although I always remind people, I think it was even as far back, it was under Obama, the congressman from John Conyers, he had put in a resolution in Congress that passed, a bill that passed that forbade the United States from funding Nazis in Ukraine. And of course, I always say, well, why do you need a bill to not fund Nazis in Ukraine if there's no Nazis in Ukraine? Obviously, there were. And by the way, that bill, that law ended up being repealed so that the U.S. could freely arm Nazis in Ukraine. But yeah, I mean, the things that we have done to these countries is just unbelievable. And then we pretend, oops, you know, how did that happen? You know, and people need to consider that, right? As U.S. warships head towards Venezuela, you know, they have to oppose the next regime change. We always oppose the one that already happened. In retrospect, we have wisdom, but we need to kind of get ahead of the curve here a little bit.
Well, we have a tendency to get so caught up in the personality of politics that we lose sight of the policy of politics. So right now we're stuck in this mindset of Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Trumpism, Trump mania, Trump phobia. But and so in doing that, we then lose sight of this is American foreign policy.
Right.
This is not administration specific. Look, you mentioned Venezuela. Trump put a $50 million bounty on the head of Nicolas Maduro, which was 25 million more than what? The bounty that Biden put on the head of Nicolas Maduro. So Trump is not the causation, he's the culmination of where we are at this point in the game. I guess that was the now I'm losing track of this. Was it Biden or Obama that overthrew the Venezuelan embassy? Was that early Biden or late Obama?
I think that's a good question. I think that was late Obama, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
It was also Obama that helped overthrow the government in Honduras, right? In 2009, that was an early regime change that Hillary Clinton bragged about later. Remember this in the hardback version of her book, Hard Choices, that she then took that paragraph out in the paperback version because she realized, oh, people aren't that excited that I did that. So I'm not going to talk about that.
And she did that in Libya with Gaddafi.
With Gaddafi in 2011. Yeah, I mean, and of course, it was Obama that started the war against Yemen. That was, you know, that led to, we don't even know how many people died in that war. I mean, at one point they were estimating that like 1 million people there could starve to death. And that was just forgotten. And that's not discussed now either, you know, and again, what happened to all those people? Who knows? But yeah, you go down the line and And well, even if you look at the immigration issue, Obama deported 3 million people. And
Deporter-in-chief.
What's that?
Deporter-in-chief.
Yeah, I think that's still a record. Trump, who knows? Maybe Trump will exceed it, but he hasn't yet. And I just saw a thing today. It was some guy did an investigation and just, you know, all the children that were taken from their parents, immigrant children under Biden, and given to these sponsors who were not vetted. Many were child abusers. Many of the kids were raped. And so what we're seeing with Trump and ICE, yeah, I mean, in a way, it seems more brutal outwardly, but basically the same policies were being pursued under Obama and Biden. And it is annoying to me. It is annoying that people get upset when Trump does it, but they didn't care when Biden did it. They didn't care when Obama did it. No one cared about those 3 million immigrants that were deported.
Well, they presented it a different way. Joe Biden gave you this with an ice cream cone.
Well, that's true in Obama too. I mean, Obama was the greatest face for the empire. I mean, whatever he did seemed to be decent because he seemed like a decent guy. I mean, it's all about like you said, how it's presented.
Market.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, and no one cared that he overthrew Gaddafi or that he overthrew, you know, the government in Honduras. There were no protests over that. In fact, he had Democracy Now! In the case of Libya was really cheerleading that operation against Gaddafi. So the bipartisan system works, but it only works for the ruling class. It doesn't work for us. It really does work well for them because, as you say, I mean, basically, the president will always have about 50% support and 50% opposition, even though their policies are virtually the same, right? So they're able to govern because of this bipartisan system that somewhat resembles democracy, I suppose, but really doesn't amount to democracy. In practice, it's a dictatorship of two parties that are basically the same. There was a great African leader, I forget who it was, who said, yeah, that, the U.S. has one party rule, but in their usual excess, they got two, right? He said something like that. And it's true. It's very true.
You have a chapter, The Arab Spring and U.S. Interference in Syria. And that took me back, or takes me back to your point about controlled chaos. That, a lot of people really thought for maybe 4 days that the Arab Spring was going to bring about some significant pro-democracy changes.
Yes, there was exuberance about that. And I would say at the beginning, it appeared that was true. Certainly in Tunisia, it seemed like you had a very indigenous movement towards democracy. In Egypt, against Mubarak. But in Egypt, that was quickly commandeered by the United States, who then moved that in the direction towards the West, where you now have Sisi, who is more pro-West and more pro-Israel than even Mubarak was. And then the rest were just shams. Then they just pretended that there was a popular revolution in Syria when that was not true, a popular revolution in Libya when that was not true, but that gave the pretext for these interventions, these regime change interventions. And most people didn't see the sleight of hand that was happening there, and just thought that the Arab Spring was this great thing, when in the end, the Arab Spring ended up resulting in the Arab Winter. And even in places like Tunisia, I mean, they ended up being overrun by the terrorists that took over Libya. A number of other border states that happened to as well. So, yeah, I mean, the Arab Spring, again, had some indigenous roots, had some promise, but the West was very good in hijacking it, as it is so often, and so often people get fooled by that until it's too late. And that's true in Syria right now. I mean, again, so many people were fooled. But any honest observer would now have to say, you know what? The people were better under Assad. Yeah.
You mentioned sleight of hand, and Chris H asks Dan, or states, Dan, you are forgetting that Obama also did DACA. He passed policy to help children of migrants, so it's easy to miss when Dems abuse migrants.
Yeah, again, he was good at, on the one hand, he'd do something decent, and then he would use that as a fig leaf for his other retrograde policies. It's absolutely true.
You mentioned Venezuela and this murder of 11 people on this boat, claiming it's a drug boat. No evidence has been presented to that effect. Hegseth says, we don't care about war crimes.
J.D. Vance said that too. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
J.D. Vance, yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I got my criminals wrong. But I want to tie this to Chicago, in that when Trump through executive order changes the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War, he then posts something to the effect of, now Chicago will see what war is all about. So he's declaring war on an American city. So, and I pose this to the audience. All of this international intrigue and subterfuge and all of this is coming to a town near you.
Yeah, well, it's obviously true. And now, what they're doing is, they're slowly testing out this thing. They first did it in Los Angeles with the National Guard, then in Washington, D.C. Now they're going to do it with Chicago. Well, they also did it in New York with the National Guard and the subways. So they're kind of rolling this program out. And all of this has been rolled out slowly over time to get people used to it. You're right. And as you say, when it's all over, you're going to have a police state that is, America will be unrecognizable because of the amount of cops and soldiers on the streets. And again, instead of providing health care for people, building roads, and infrastructure, making sure people have housing and food, things that would alleviate crime, things that would alleviate suffering. Instead, they're just coming in and beating people's brains out. I heard a guy, and it's very true. I heard a guy who's interesting on a podcast who moved away from the U.S. And he said, in the U.S., he says, every society to some extent has a police state, but you have kind of soft police states and hard police states. In a lot of countries, you'll notice that the cops
don't carry guns.
Or you don't have guns. Are kind of nice, like they'll walk an old lady across the street. In the U.S., we have a hard police state. The cops are mean for the most part. The customs people are even meaner. You get harassed at the airport. It's a mean country now, and it's going to get meaner again unless we stand up to what's happening and say no. We this is not what we want.
Well, that's one of the questions I posed to one of my classes today in discussing this. In terms of the question that I asked him is Donald Trump moving us to civil war? Because they're guinea pigging, or I called it the guinea piggerization of DC, now Chicago, and at what point do the Americans say, oh, wait a minute, and this one gun per person in the United States starts to galvanize, and people start shooting back and saying, no, you're not coming in here. You're not coming into Aurora, Illinois. We have guns too. So your thoughts? Well,
again, I think whatever form it takes, I do think that the future that the ruling class has for America is, hundreds of millions of vassals and a few guys who are richer than God. And we're getting very close to that now. People can't afford their homes. Basically, a few people are going to own everything, and the rest of us are going to have nothing, and they're going to rule over us again unless we fight back. And that's a sad reality. And you guys, someone reminded me, I saw a tweet about it, that I guess in that Project 2025, it essentially talks about that. I mean, it really does set forth that the game plan is to maximize profit for the capitalist class, and to seize everything from everyone else. And that's what's happening. That's what the big, beautiful bill was about, crushing all of our social programs, driving a lot of people into unemployment and homelessness. And now, of course, what's Trump doing? Now he's making it illegal to be homeless. What are people supposed to do? They don't care. It's dystopic. I mean, go back and look at those science fiction books and movies like Mad Max. I mean, that's kind of where we're headed. And you do raise an interesting question. All these, kind of right-wing gun advocates who said, "Oh, we need our guns to prevent, the tyranny." Where are you now? Are you preventing? Are you doing anything to prevent tyranny at the moment? I mean,
well, but see, the National Guard hasn't gone into Des Moines. It hasn't gone into Sioux City. It's gone into Oakland.
right.
Or no, well, it's gone into LA and it's gone into DC, and Chicago and Oakland are, so he hasn't gone into Grand Rapids. So that's where they are.
Right. Those people could, they could defend some of these other people. But again, that's not the game plan. Well, because the game plan all along was to be armed not against tyranny, but against people of color.
Well, there you go.
Let's be totally honest, Wilmer, what's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, no, but it's time. Look, I mean, it's time to send up, the warning sign. Our freedoms are dying. I mean, they're dying quick.
Mm-hmm.
And, at some point it's going to be too late to squawk about it because it'll be gone. And it's a dangerous, dangerous time we live in. I've never felt this, as a revolutionary, which I am. I need to maintain some level of optimism, but all I can say is it's very hard to right now. We live in the worst times I've ever seen in my lifetime, certainly.
Two things, and to wrap this up. One, Emily Schrader, I think people in California, Illinois, and New York own guns too. Yes, but you're not talking about gun ownership, Emily. We're talking about the mindset behind it. And so in my opinion, I can't speak for Dan on this, but yeah, I know people in California own guns. I know people in Chicago and other places in Illinois own guns, but there's a different mindset here in terms of gun ownership and why they're owning those guns. And I'll let you speak to that, Dan. And final point having to do with Russell Vought and this whole thing about a post-constitutional America, and are we in a post-constitutional epoch?
It appears so. I mean, the rule of law is being purposefully destroyed. Basically, Trump has been involved in a blitzkrieg, right? To do all these things before the courts can even stop, even consider to stop him if they want to stop him at all. I mean, clearly, due process, the rule of law is going out the window. And ICE seems to be the shock troops that are doing it, right? Going around masked without badges, detaining people off the streets willy-nilly, some even who were citizens. And that's going to get worse. And again, I think this bombing of the boat killing 11 people they claim to be drug dealers is part of that. It's trying to send a message. We don't have to follow due process, right?
Correct.
Due process would require you to apprehend those 11 people if they were, if you really thought they were drug dealers, try them, convict them, and penalize them. And by the way, drug dealing is not a capital crime. The death penalty wouldn't even be a possibility, even if they were convicted, right? So just to murder them outright defies everything we know about due process and the rule of law. But again, they're trying to send the message that that's gone. You can't depend on that anymore. And so, yeah, I do think we're in a post-constitutional America where the rule of law is dying, and you have a Supreme Court that's willing to be complicit in its murder.
Dan Kovalik, Syria, Anatomy of Regime Change, co-authored by Dan Kovalik and Dr. Jeremy Kuzmara, forward by Oliver Stone. It's a great read, as are all of your books. In fact, I was going through looking for some stuff through my bookcases, and I said, man, I've got 4 of Dan Kovalik's book. Now you have your own section in my library, Dan.
I'm very honored, Wilmer. I could not be more honored.
Have your own. You and Gerald Horn.
You're the guy who right next to Gerald. Okay, now I know.
You're right next to Gerald. I got you right next to Gerald.
I'm very honored. I mean, he is the man. I can't, but so I'm very honored.
You're the man sitting next to the man. How about that?
Fair enough.
Dan, thank you, man. Really appreciate it.
Great book. You're the best. Love you, man. Take care. Okay.
All right, folks. Again, I got to thank Dan Kovalik so much for joining me today, and thank you all for listening to us, for joining the conversation today. And stay tuned. New episode tomorrow. And oh shoot, it's been such a long day. I am drawing a blank. My goodness. Tell you what, hang on a second here, because I shouldn't disrespect my guest in this manner. But I it's been a very long day, and I'm drawing a blank on oh my God. Who do we have tomorrow? Wait a minute, here we go. I know how to do it. Regis. There we go. Golly. Regis Tremblay. There we go. Thank you. Regis Tremblay is going to, thank you, Melody. Regis Tremblay is going to join us tomorrow. And because, as you know, the Russia is escalating their attacks on Ukraine, and Regis is going to join us from Crimea. It has been a very long day. Please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. And remember, this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots, unless I can't remember who my guest is going to be. See you all tomorrow. Regis Tremblay will join us. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.